All right. So one thing we're going to talk about today is fatigue when it comes to everything outside of training. So a lot of people, relate fatigue to their overtraining or they're going to the gym too much. But really, it's most of the times not even about the training fatigue. That's just kind of part of the equation. There's a lot more to it, and we're going to dive into that on this call. So essentially, if you're tired all the time, even on your rest days, you're not able to recover. We're going to dig into what's actually draining you and not allowing you to recover. So for the majority of people, your training isn't anywhere close to being the whole story. A lot of people aren't training to true failure anyway, and that's not a knock at anybody. It takes time to build that mindset and that resiliency up to be able to take it to true failure, to the point to where your training is taking you into a very deep dive as far as the recovery hole goes. But a lot of people, and we're talking about specifically about people who don't train to failure, if that makes sense. They assume that their training is what's making them tired, right? Like they go to the gym 3, 4, 5 days a week, and they think, oh, I'm just training too much. Maybe I'm even overtraining, right? And as hard as I train, I don't think I've overtrained, but maybe a time or two in my whole 10 years of bodybuilding. So for the majority of people, 99.99% of the people, you're not overtraining, you're under recovering is really what it boils down to. And you also have to keep in mind too, fatigue does not equal that you trained hard, right? That training is just a very small part of the whole equation. And rest days alone, like just taking a rest day, taking that one day and not not saying skipping, but just not going to the gym for that hour, 2 hours, on that rest day won't fix all these problems by itself. So if we look at this illustration here, essentially this is like an iceberg, right? A lot of people see the training and think, okay, this is my issue, right? But in reality, it's a lot of other things: sleep, stress, nutrition, recovery. All of these things are actually contributing to what's draining you from a fatigue standpoint. So we have to remember that fatigue comes from a lot of places, right? And it's essentially the accumulation of the stress that you have placed upon yourself, whether that be intentionally or unintentionally, just across the day. You have to keep in mind your body does not separate physical stress from mental or emotional stress. It hits all of your recovery systems in the same manner. So you have this thing called this allostatic load. This is the combination of all of the stressors from every angle. Every single stress bit that you're having across the day all goes toward that allostatic load. Your body doesn't know if you're running from a tiger or if you're late for work, right? Stress is stress, and we have too much stress that then spills into your fatigue and deepens that fatigue hole. So if we look at it, if this is like a battery, right? And at the very top, that's when you're full, right? But if you had things like relationship issues, work deadlines, poor sleep, you're under eating, you have low blood sugar, stimulant overuse, you know, you're going to the gym 7 days a week, you're doing a ton of cardio, you're keeping this a recovery system on the lower end, and it's not able to properly refill, right? You have to think of your fatigue system as a bucket, right? And if you have holes in the bucket to where relationship issues, poor sleep, stimulant overuse. Those are holes in the bucket that has to be fixed, or you'll never fully and properly recover. And then you also have to keep in mind about your adrenal system as well too. This is something that a lot of people just completely overlook. Specifically in the case of like drinking caffeine, right? A lot of people just drink copious amounts of caffeine without actually realizing that they're putting a pretty heavy tax on their adrenal glands, on the adrenal system in itself. And this is the ultimate energy regulator for your body. So, when your adrenal system gets overworked, you're going to feel tired, wired, a little bit of both. You're going to feel way out in left field, right? Um, it's just not a good place that you want to be, but it all boils down to your cortisol load across the day. So if you have too high of cortisol, which as you guys know can come from, you know, uh, poor sleep, stress, just overall you're not in a good, healthy bodily state, right? High cortisol. Too much of that is going to lead to burnout, and then, if we even going further down that rabbit hole, insulin resistance, things of that nature too. And then also your cortisol can be too low as well too, which would just make it hard to get out of bed, right? So you got to have a good balance on your cortisol load, but you also have to keep in mind that, if we're thinking about this from, you know, a fatigue standpoint, you have to keep the stress mitigation tactics, at the forefront of everything that you do. Things that we have talked about before, like box breathing, meditation, the vagus nerve hum, things like that to help, pull your body out of that fight or flight response to get you down into that rest and digest state. Hence, will then pull that cortisol load down systemically. Now, if we get back into the training side of things, more is not always better. It seems like 9 times out of 10, when I onboard a new client, they're talking about, oh, I go to the gym 6, sometimes 7 days a week. I just have to go. And I get it from a mental standpoint. You physically going to the gym, you physically moving your body in some way, shape, or form is a good thing for mental health. But if we're talking about actually resistance training 6, 7 days in a row, you're doing your body more of a disservice than a good thing. So, as always, training isn't always better, and training can make that fatigue bucket drain a lot quicker. So, if you're under a lot of stress, and this can be from any facet of life, from work to family to the kid's sick, whatever the case may be, like just stress in itself. And then you're training hard on top of that, and then you're also doing a ton of cardio, and you're also doing a ton of steps. You're doing a lot. This just kind of adds to that allostatic stress load, right? Again, it's going to dig that hole of fatigue even deeper. So I'll say it again: more is not always better, particularly in the case when your cup um, is already overflowing with things that you're having to do, and the stress is just piling up and up, right? You have to be able to get out of that state, and more into a rest and digest state if you're going to see any kind of improvements with your fatigue management. So, what do you actually need to do to make sure that you're not in this predicament with everything else, like I've talked to you guys about? As far as, like, if you're wondering if you're in a calorie deficit, the easiest way to do that is do an audit, right? Same thing for this one too. Um, you know, Audit exactly what you're doing. If you find any issues, adjust it, change, document any kind of progress that you're seeing, and then, actually recover from it. So, if we're looking at, like, what can you do as far as, like, from a stress load, like a stress scenario kind of things, right? It's not as easy as, like, just be less stressed, right? Like, we know that just doesn't work, right? But you have to use those, sorry, I got some sinus congestion going on. Those meditation techniques, box breathing, meditating, vagus nerve humming, things of that nature to help bring that allostatic load down. And then if we're looking at it from a sleep quality aspect, make sure that you have enough hours of sleep, good quality of sleep, and you also have a healthy sleep environment as well too, right? Cold bedroom, white noise in the background. You take a hot shower before that you get into bed. That way that your body temp, drastically falls from being on the hotter side, down to a cooler side. It'll help you get to sleep a little easier. As far as the food intake goes, now obviously this can vary based on, if you're in a cut, a bulk, reverse, a maintenance, whatever the case may be. But at the end of the day, like, you should make sure that you are essentially eating enough calories. And even if you're in, like, a deficit, right, we can still use things like, carb cycling, high days, low days, refeed days, diet breaks, a weekend maintenance, things like that, to make sure that you're actually able to recover. And that's kind of the purpose of those tools and techniques anyway. And then if we're looking at it from an actual training perspective, take a deload. Or if you absolutely have to go to the gym, do 50 to 70% of the intensity that you normally do. You're essentially just going through the motions at that point, which is why if I'm taking a deload, I'm just not going to the gym. I just don't like I don't like knowing that there was reps left on the table, so I would just rather not go and just not tempt myself. Um, but that is a thing to do, like in between phases, especially if you start to feel that your recovery is going down the tank as well too. So, essentially what all this boils down to is you need to fix the system as a whole, not just look at, oh, I'm not training 5, 6 days, 7 days a week. Is this too much, right? You need to look at everything from a recoverability standpoint and make sure that all those are on point too. But still, it needs to be said that you shouldn't be training 6 or 7 days a week anyway. At least resistance training in some way, shape, or form. So if you want to truly audit yourself, obviously track your the time that you're in bed, asleep, the quality of sleep as well too. Make sure that you're eating, consistent enough meals with enough carbs to actually help you recover from the workouts. If you need to pull back training, even take a deload, do that as well too. And then even if you have to go as far as like taking like a very low stimulating morning walk, such as like no cell phone, no music in your ears, no nothing, just you walking down the road, sun in your eyes. To kind of get things going in the morning, and then kind of same for the evening time. You could do the exact same thing at nighttime, in conjunction with a screen, free evening, right? If you normally go to bed at 9 o'clock, cut off all screens at 8. That means no TV, no laptop, no cell phone. Read you a book, stretch, go outside for a walk, get in the shower, get in the bed. And then if you really are wanting to, you know, go the extra mile, right? And you want to have a little bit of supplemental help, magnesium, electrolytes, and adaptogens as well too. So, the main thing is just don't think that your fatigue is just coming from training. It's coming from all facets of your life. So you have to make sure that all of those holes in the bucket are plugged first, because if not, nothing that you do will fix it. You have to fix what's broken first, and then look at what the inputs are, and then just go from there. So that's all that I got for you guys today. Let's see if I can pull this back up. Hang on, the screen's acting funny. All right, cool. I can see you guys now. But any of that makes sense? Anybody got any questions with that? This is something that we've kind of talked about in a roundabout way, maybe 8, 9, 10 months ago, but thought it'd be good to touch on it again. But anybody got any questions?
I don't have any questions because you're basically talking about, as you know, my day-to-day life, like my
Yeah.
biggest nerve issues.
Yep.
But just like kind of some input on like little things that like someone like me has had to learn to think about, which obviously I'm a different case because my vagus nerve is just sat on by one of my vertebrae. But
Yeah.
um, I was actually to the point recently where I realized a stressor for me was actually my wearable.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
because I know I'm such a creature of habit that
Yep.
my morning walk, my lunchtime walk, and my evening walk get my step goal done every day.
Yep.
But on like those rest days, stupid Apple Watch will be like, you're behind,
Yep.
you're
Yep.
behind on
Yep.
stuff. And like, I would be on my walking pad a lot at work. So on my rest days, and I think I even put this on a check-in once, that I was getting like 20,000 steps a day for a time just because of moving around too much.
Yep.
And I realized like how much fatigue was actually accumulating just from what's supposed to be gentle walking, but it was just like build up, build up, build up. So I actually had to stop wearing my wearable,
Yep.
um, just to remove like that type of input, like from my activity tracker. And it seems to be helping with the stress and the fatigue actually to do that, and just trust, like, I know I'm getting my steps from these walks
Yep.
and pull back in that aspect.
And it's funny that you say that, because it's funny how like the world changes. Like, when the first Apple Watch come out, everybody wanted the cool screen and all the cool things that go with it. And I think they're on like Apple Watch 10 maybe. But I actually just quit wearing mine, and I bought the Google Fitbit Air kind of thing. It's a screenless wearable. It does not make any kind of buzz or notification if somebody's calling you, texting you, nothing. So like this is like day three of wearing it, and I'll still get those phantom vibrations of like, my Apple Watch is vibrating. I look and like, oh, it's not my Apple Watch, right? This thing doesn't do that at all. So I was kind of in that same boat as well too, as far as like I used to be a big watcher of the workout calories burn when I first started working out. If my leg day wasn't burning over 1,200 calories, I was like, oh God, I got to do five more sets until
Yeah.
I hit that. But thank God I got out of that. But I was, kind of like you, like I think once my Apple Watch updated a few months ago, it was like, all right, you've been sitting for 1 hour, time to stand up. And I'm like, crap, I guess I do need to stand up, right? And it would cause a little bit of like, I've got 20 other things I have to do. I don't have time to go for a walk. So that's kind of one reason why I got rid of it, and I just don't have the Apple Watch to be notifying me of Zillow updating a house down the street or, whatever the case may be. It's just it's one less distraction. So, and it was only $100. So, I was like, hey, I'm gonna give it a shot and kind of see how that goes. But I definitely understand what you're saying there. So.
For sure. And I think there's actually some studies on Apple Watch and how it impacts your nervous system, keeps it like in anticipation. So that's
Yep.
an interesting one to look into.
And it would even get to a point for me, sometimes that I wouldn't even have my phone or my watch on my purses. I would just be out at a walk and I would feel like my wrist was vibrating. I would look and I'm like, my watch is not even there. You know how like they call it the phantom limbs, syndrome. If you lose an arm, like you still feel like your fingers and things like that. Like that's a real thing. I think somebody has coined a phrase here in the past couple of years is talking about the phantom iPhone or the phantom Apple Watch syndrome, where essentially you feel like it's there when it's not there. But um, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this thing works in the coming weeks, especially since there's no screen. I like it already. So, but anyway, thank you for your input.
Yep.
If nobody else has anything, we will wrap it up and go from there. So, I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I will talk to you guys soon. See you guys.